Hey, Armand here to answer the question, what happens when there's no planet in a section of the horoscope? What happens when there is a blank area in the horoscope? And we're going to answer this question because it is, well, it's one that you asked for in the comments of a previous video. And it's also one of the questions that clients ask a lot. A lot of things that, my clients say, gee, how come I got nothing over here in this area of the horoscope? Well, let's not talk about areas. Let's talk about houses of the horoscope. The sky, the whole big circular sky, I mean, from our perspective, it looks like a big circular vault that's spinning around, is divided into 12 houses. And so there are 12 houses of the horoscope. The division is into 12 areas of life. Of course, there's a lot of stuff that happens in life, so each house has to take on a lot of different jobs. They're usually kind of related. It depends which systems you use. There's a lot we can say about this, and there's a lot we're not going to say about it. For simplicity's sake, I want to point out that the houses are always more or less in the same area of the sky. In other words, if you look due south, if you go outside and you look due south, you're looking at the midheaven, right? In this case, it is 13 degrees of Aquarius, but it is the borderline between the 9th and the 10th house. It's not in every system and so on, but we're going nice and simple over here. So the 9th house is a little to the west of south, and the 10th house is a little to the east of south. The area that the point that is rising in the east is the beginning of the 1st house. The point that is setting in the west is the beginning of the 7th house. It's always more or less the same. And then what happens is that the zodiac, the band of stars and the planets in them, rolls through this each day. It's a little bit like that if you watch Wheel of Fortune, right? So let's say the little ticker for each of the contestants stays in the same place, and then the wheel runs through it, right? So in this case, the wheel is going to run through and spin around once per day. And so the different signs and the different planets that are in it are going to be in a particular area of the sky for a particular amount of time each day. Now, there are 12 houses and there's 24 hours. So each planet or each sign will be in each of the 12 houses for about 2 hours per day. So this whole horoscope, the whole image of all the stars and everything is spinning around, and it's doing so in the course of one day, spends about 2 hours in each of the houses. Now, as I said, each of the houses has its own particular job. The 1st house is, it represents your body, it represents your way of dealing with the world. It is your life, and we're dealing with situations with others, and it's you. The 7th house, that's the other. That could be partners, that could be romantic partners, business partners. In fact, people that are opponents to you are in that area. And certain professionals are in that, like the people that a therapist, for example. An astrologer would be someone that is represented by the 7th house. It's the person you're across the table from. The 10th house at the top of the chart there, that is your reputation, your career. It's what you're known for. It's your point of destiny, as they say. Now, if we were to look at this particular section of the sky, we can see that all of the planets are kind of bunched together. This was just taken yesterday morning. The planets are all kind of bunched together. They all move at different rates. The moon goes around the zodiac, goes through the whole circle from Aries through Taurus, and eventually back to Aries again in about 28 days. That's fast. And Pluto does that same cycle in 248 years. Saturn does it in about 29 and a half years, Jupiter in about 12. The point is, sometimes they all kind of catch up with each other in a bunch together. Sometimes they're all spread out. If you're born or if you're looking at the sky in the winter time in the early 2020s, you often see that everything is kind of bunched together, as it is in this chart over here. and there's a lot of blank areas. Sometimes things are a little bit more spread out. In the summertime, they'll be a little bit more spread as the sun and Venus and Mercury and Mars find their way to other parts of the zodiac. But right now, the moon is the only one who gets away in the winter of 2023. So the planets are all bunched together. And you can see here that we have the sun and the moon very close together, and they are in the east, right there in Pisces, rising. And then this is right around 7 a.m. And then when we go to about 9 a.m., we have the sun and the moon are still pretty close together, but you'll notice now they're in different parts of the chart. They're no longer down by the ascendant. They're up in the top of they're up a little bit further along, and we have a different ascendant now. We have 27 of Aries rising. And if you came back just a few hours later, 2 hours later, around 11 o'clock in the morning, then you have this situation, and now the sun is nearing the midheaven. That's noon is when the sun crosses the midheaven, and the moon has made it pretty far up, and we have Gemini rising, and the planet Mars is sort of trailing behind everybody else. Okay, so what we have here is a situation where we have planets in houses, and we can see that it's a very incidental or accidental thing to have a planet in a house, right? It changes about every 2 hours. The sun went from being in the 12th house to the 11th house to the 10th house over the course of a couple of hours. This is what happens every single day, whether the planets are spread out or whether they're all bunched together. So rather than ask the question, what does it mean when there's nobody in the house? Let's ask the question and answer it. What does it mean when there is a planet in a house? Because, as you can see, that there's a planet in the house is a matter of, you happen to be born at that particular time of day. More or less the planets are in the same sign of the zodiac all day long, but they move through the houses. They go through all 12 houses in 24 hours. So a couple of things. If a planet is in the house, it is where the energy of that planet is going to express itself most directly. That's where you're going to see the energy, whatever that planet represents, Venus, love, aesthetics, socializing. That's where Venus is going to be represented most directly. Saturn, work, feeling tested, feeling a little put upon, needing to always take responsibility. Saturn, where Saturn is, you've got those things going on. So is it good to have a planet in the house? Well, it's probably pretty nice to have Venus there. And as for Saturn, well, he's got to be someplace. He's going to be someplace in your chart, but you don't necessarily want Saturn in your chart in a particular house. You don't necessarily want Saturn. Well, let's not make anybody feel bad. There's some places you probably don't want Saturn to be. Pluto, where you don't necessarily have much of a sense of control about things. Pluto tends to take care of you because you're his game piece in that house. But it doesn't mean that he's going to give you an easy time of it necessarily. So you don't necessarily want some of these planets in a house. You might want them to be someplace where they can be a little bit more benign. Some planets like Venus and Jupiter, maybe the sun, moon, who knows with Mercury, you kind of do want them around. You do want them in important places. But the point is that this is where that energy is going to express itself most directly, and you're really going to feel it there. The other thing that happens is that you often encounter people who represent the energy of that planet. I have a client who has Pluto in the 6th house, and inevitably the 6th house represents work and co-workers and things like that, people that you hire, servants in the old days, employees now. And at every job she goes, she's very competent, really excellent professional. Every job she goes to, there's Pluto. There's always somebody there to be the real tough person, the real bitchy coworker, the one who throws her under the bus in some way or another, right? This is the kind of thing. You have Pluto in that house. just can't quite get a sense of control over it. So you often encounter people who represent. They represent. You have Venus in the house. Well, maybe that's where you find beautiful people. Maybe that's where you find love. So the energy of the planet is expressed directly there, most directly in the house. And also, you tend to find people who represent that planet in a very kind of direct way. My Pluto example is a great example of encountering people who are just representing the archetype of the planet. So do you want planets in a house? Maybe, but not necessarily. Now we can flip it around a little bit and say, yeah, but what if there's nobody in the house? I have nobody in my house of relationship. There's nobody in my fifth house of romance and fun. Maybe I'm not getting anything. Maybe I'd rather have Pluto than have nothing. It doesn't work like that, though, because these planets that are in houses, they're kind of like tenants, right? They're there, they're staying there. But somebody is the landlord of the house. And this is actually, they actually use the phrase in some traditional astrology of tenants and landlords. So even if there are no tenants, there is a landlord. Let's take a look at how that might work. In this chart, we have no planets in the seventh house, and that is the house of relationship. You say, oh my gosh, well, there's no relationships to be had then. But that's not the case, because we look to the sign that is on the cusp of the house of relationship, and that sign is Libra, right? We have 27 Libra on the cusp of the house of relationship. Now, Venus is the planet that is most associated with the sign of Libra. We call it the ruler of Libra. And because Venus rules Libra, it's like she's in the house of relationship. It's actually even better, right? We know that the house of relationship then is going to have a very Venusian kind of energy, because Venus that's her house. She's got that place. She owns it, right? So that the energy of Venus is going to express itself. In this case, the energy of Libra, right? So it's very much about graciousness and form and things like that. And so what do? We look to see where Venus is in the chart, and it turns out that she is in Aries, at 1 degree of Aries in the 12th house. And so now we look to see Venus. What sign is she in? What house is she in? What aspects is she making to the other planets? And that tells us about relationship. Now, this is maybe a great example, maybe not the best example, because we have to consider another thing. And that is the ruler of the house is both the incidental ruler, because that has to do with the time that you were born. Here in this case, we have Sagittarius on the cusp of the 7th house. Now, Sagittarius is ruled by the planet Jupiter, and so we would look to see what's going on with Jupiter. Well, he's in the 11th house of friends and associations, so maybe that's where we're going to find partners. And he's in the sign of Aries, so maybe it has something to do with competition and sports, or someone who's really like somebody who's really a maverick and ready to go it alone and so on. So this tells us something about the character of relationship based upon the ruler of the house. So that's telling us a lot. So in my first example, Venus was the incidental or accidental ruler of the 7th house. In my second example, Jupiter is the incidental or accidental ruler. You'll notice that between these two examples, the planets are more or less in the same position. I mean, only the moon has moved about a degree in this entire morning. Everybody else has just moved a few minutes. But the signs have changed. And so it's very different to have Venus ruling your house of relationship, or to have Jupiter, and someplace in the middle, it was Mars and Pluto with the sign of Scorpio was ruling the house of relationship. We get very different feel, even though the planets haven't really moved that much. So we look to that sign that is on the cusp of the house of relationship. But wait, there's more. And that is what we call the natural ruler of the horoscope, of the house. Now, if we start with Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, on the cusp of the first house, then Mars is the natural ruler of the first house because Mars is the ruler of Aries. And then the second house, the natural ruler is Venus because she rules Taurus. Mercury is the natural ruler of the third house because he rules Gemini, and so on. Saturn is the natural ruler of the 10th house. And so, in addition to looking at the incidental ruler, we can also look to the natural ruler of the horoscope of the house. When we put Aries on the ascendant, that is said, and then we go, one sign per house, that is said to be the natural horoscope. Natural, it's it's when the houses and the signs coincide. So we're calling it the natural horoscope. In this case, you see Venus would be the natural ruler of the seventh house because she rules Libra. In the example that I gave before, she was also the incidental ruler. Generally speaking, the natural ruler tells you something about sort of like an inner set towards the matter at hand. It's really what the planet signifies in general, right? No matter what you think about the houses, Venus always has to do with relationships. Saturn always has to do with work and career and things like that. So in a sense, the natural ruler just means this is what the planet is about. The incidental ruler or the accidental ruler is the planet that really kind of tells you most about where you're going to find things in your life. And of course, we find it in the natal chart, and then we look to transits to that ruler, and that tells us what's going on in terms of what might be happening this year or this month or something like that. Well, it's a whole big deal, astrology is. But I wanted to convince you that just because there's nothing in a house doesn't mean there's nothing going on in that area of life. And we do have specific ways of digging out just what it is. All right, we'll see you next time.